Welcome to the program. I'm Aaron Dykes. This is the INFOWARS Nightly News. Today is Tuesday, April 24th, 2012.
Tonight, breaking news from the InfoWar. The Bilderberg Group is set to meet in Virginia, May 31st to June 3rd. Is this Chantilly 3.0? Then, it looks like Ron Paul is winning states. In fact, he has the most delegates in Iowa and Minnesota, yet the mainstream media continues its ban on Ron Paul coverage. Plus, the Obama administration announces the war on terror is over. So why do we still have the TSA, NDAA, the Patriot Act, and countless wars of aggression? And we flash back to GM corn infected with AIDS. Is it coming to a cob near you? And finally, Aaron Dykes sits down with Yurian Masan. This will be a conversation with two of the most prolific writers exposing eugenics in the Northern Hemisphere. All this and more on the InfoWars Nightly News. I take you now to the InfoWars Central Texas Command Center, deep behind enemy lines, with Aaron Dykes, your host.
Tonight in news, the location of the 2012 Bilderberg meeting may have been revealed. Top researchers, including Tony Gosling, believe they've found that the location will again, for the third time, be Chantilly, Virginia, the site of Bilderberg in 2008, where Alex Jones and crew helped surround the group and rout them out. Indeed, protests against Bilderberg have been growing steadily since Alex first went to the Ottawa, Canada meeting in 2006 and the subsequent release of his powerful documentary Endgame. Of course, Jim Tucker has been the longtime sleuth of Bilderberg, covering it more than 35 years, but that was many lonely years covering it out without the help of the mainstream press and the rest of it. Now, a large portion of international press have begun to cover the meeting. Even Fox News had to cover it last year in St. Moritz, where myself and Paul Joseph Watson went to cover the meeting in Switzerland. That meeting ended early because so many protesters gathered on the Hill and chased them down during one of their nature walks. They decided to turn tail. We will, of course, keep you up to date on whether or not that is a confirmed location. They are a deceptive group. They control much of the world's agenda, and they may well change hotels or locations altogether. But that would be upcoming between the dates of May 31st and June 3rd, just over a month away. Meanwhile, Ron Paul supposedly already out of the Republican race, supposedly Mitt Romney clinching the nomination, and yet, wait, hold on. Ron Paul actually won Iowa. And so the Iowa caucus leading off the GOP primary, the one that the establishment was so afraid Ron Paul might win, that they said the Iowa caucus would be discredited and no longer count if Ron Paul won. Well, now he indeed has officially won, gaining officially a majority of those delegates. There's 28 delegates in Iowa. Ron Paul over the weekend gained at least 14. More will be chosen leading into the statewide and then national conventions. He's also has a majority of delegates in Minnesota and is likely to have a majority of delegates in as many as 6 or more other states, which would contest things at the GOP delegation in August. Of course, we're not saying that Ron Paul is likely to actually get the nomination, but he's showing the fraud of the process. They definitely ripped him off. They gave him improper media coverage. They blacked him out of the media, did everything to tarnish his name, then did all kinds of election politicking, fraudulent vote counting. Who knows what happened with electronic machines? Why did he not gain votes versus 2008 numbers in Nevada, and on and on. Well, Ron Paul is just one front, and the larger fight against the establishment, you have to engage the process to show that the process is not working while pursuing other peaceful alternatives to try to rein this system in to prevent it going to the full-scale level. So that's something to watch, but they said Ron Paul couldn't win, wouldn't win. Now, in fact, he is winning. Let's go to the clip.
Worst case scenario, Ron Paul ties for first place in Minnesota. Anything better than that, he wins outright. And it should be noted, he warned us this was going to happen.
Thank you very much. When the dust settles, I think there's a very good chance that we're going to have the maximum number of delegates coming out of Minnesota.
Ron Paul was right. Nobody is getting more delegates than he did in Minnesota or in Iowa or in wherever else this Ron Paul delegate strategy of his pays off.
And so even though people like Santorum have dropped out of the race, there still is a contest within the GOP. I think it's important that Ron Paul supporters continue to make their presence known. Of course, we've covered on this show how he continues to have crowds of 5,000, 10,000 or more at his rallies, while the Romneys of the world have only a few hundred, and they have to cut the angles a certain way so they don't show that they have giant empty sports stadiums with only a few people down on the actual field. You've also got Ron Paul advisor Doug Weed commenting on the delegation process, and of course the clip you just saw on Rachel Maddow, really the only mainstream outlet to cover it now that they've pretty much alleged that the process is over and that it's this Obama versus Romney thing and blah, blah, blah. It's all staged elections. I have no faith in that process, but I think we still do need to demonstrate the process. That's not doublespeak. I just think it's important to pursue both, not get your hopes up that you're going to fix the system through rigged elections, but at the same time show that a strong candidate can have certain types of successes, show where he's been shut out of the ability to actually win, which he could have done if the media backed him, gave him a fair shot like the other controlled candidates, and if the elections themselves had been fair, if there wasn't all that fudging and whatnot. Because you have to remember, first it was Romney winning Iowa by 8 votes. 8 votes. Then a few weeks later, it was Santorum. All along, though, they had to know Ron Paul really had the delegate support, and now it's proven he has a minimum of a first-place win on the delegates for Iowa, Minnesota, and other states. Of course, Maine, one of the main states where he may have it. Meanwhile, the war on terror is over. That is, if you can believe an Obama administration official who's highlighted the fact that Obama can now safely embrace Islamicists and that activities like the Arab Spring and so forth have put a new path in the Middle East, a new way to gain popular support over there without having to fight the war against al-Qaeda. Of course, it has everything to do with the fact that through the Libyan war and now the effort in Syria to destabilize Assad, the West has openly partnered with al-Qaeda. There's the headlines right there. The West and al-Qaeda on the same side. Then in Syria, al-Qaeda and the West back the Syrian rebels, and on and on. It's just a fact. Now they're covering for it as they make frontline the war against the American people. They're still going to keep all the police state, all the TSA checkpoints that they're now rolling out to bus stops, train stops, eventually highway checkpoints, eventually malls. They've already breached sports stadiums with big events like the Super Bowl. That will all continue to expand because America must be kept, must be dumbed down under the larger sustainable development plan for population control in every sense. But in many ways, the Obama administration has moved away from the fearful exterior of the war on terror. Another aspect to it, though, the system may not be all intact on that point. They may not be giving up because just in the news, they're making big splashes over the supposed al-Qaeda plot to bomb the Long Island Railway. They've got this trial with Bryant Neal Venice, an American soldier in the Army who later converted to al-Qaeda in 2008. That's not a recipe for sheep dipping. Anyway, he supposedly wanted to bomb a Walmart and the Long Island Railroad, and now there's big fear all over the airwaves about that, even as certain Obama officials are saying basically the war on terror is over. Another war on the American people is in the executive power. Of course, the Constitution very succinctly lays out the balance of powers designed by the framers. The executive branch was to be co-equal with the judicial and congressional branches and checked in many other ways by the states and individuals of this country. But more and more, presidents are relying on executive power, and now Obama is officially in the headlines embracing that he, too, will have to use executive power because of the gridlock in Congress and the fact that so many dirty Republicans won't go along with his agenda. We can't wait, he says, and they've got all these quotes from board meetings. One Saturday last fall, President Obama interrupted a White House strategy meeting to raise an issue not on the agenda. He declared, aides recalled, that the administration needed to more aggressively use executive power to govern in the face of congressional obstructionism. Increasingly in recent months, he said, the administration has been seeking ways to act with Congress, branding its unilateral efforts, "We can't wait," a slogan that aides said Obama coined at the strategy meeting and continued to roll out with dozens of new policies, from jobs to veterans to drug shortages, fuel economy, and on and on. Obama's not saying he has a right to defy a congressional statute, said Richard A. Pildes, a law professor at NYU. If the legislative path is blocked, he otherwise has the legal authority to issue an executive order on an issue. And they're more willing to do that more than they were 2 years ago. And it goes on to talk about how Obama's new approach is doing just that, putting him in the company of his predecessors. Mr. Bush, for example, failed to persuade Congress to pass a bill allowing religiously affiliated groups to receive taxpayer grants, then issued an executive order to make the change. That's what presidents do, said one Mr. Jack L. Goldsmith. It's taken Obama 2 years to get there, but this has happened throughout history. You can't be in that office with its enormous responsibilities. When things don't happen, you get blamed for it, and not exercising all the powers you have accrued to it over time just doesn't make sense, they basically said. Well, that's what makes it more dangerous. Not that Obama's the first to rule by executive fiat, the first to misuse executive orders to put United Nations agendas on the table through strictly the executive branch, or to try to pass an EPA ban on greenhouse gases strictly through the executive arm. It's been a gradual abuse of the executive branch that's the real danger to our country. It's been ongoing really for a long time, but especially since the days of FDR. Recall, he used the phrase broad executive power. Let's roll that clip now.
I am prepared, under my constitutional duty, to recommend the measures that a stricken nation in the midst of a stricken world may require. But in the event that the national emergency is still critical, I shall not evade the clear course of duty that will then confront me. I shall ask the Congress for the one remaining instrument to meet the crisis: broad executive power.
Broad executive power.
Die Entwicklung in Amerika mit dem allergrößten positiven Interesse. Und wir sind dort der festen Überzeugung, dass Präsident Roosevelt und seine Berater auf dem richtigen Weg sind.
I believe President Roosevelt has chosen the right path. We are dealing with the greatest social problems ever known, says Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propagandist. Millions of unemployed must get their jobs back.
Und in den Kontoren verloren haben, wieder an ihre alten Arbeitsstellen zurückzuführen.
And this cannot be left to private initiative. It is the government that must tackle this problem. So there you have it, broad executive power endorsed by none other than Nazi Joseph Goebbels back in the 30s when they were still gaining power into World War I, and when he openly applauded the efforts of President Roosevelt to seize that executive power to do what must be done for the country. The only problem is it totally opened the gates to destroying the Constitution, totally overusing the executive branch, and on and on. You know, Harry Truman, who succeeded FDR, used the phrase, "the buck stops here," to describe the presidency at a time when it was increasingly untrue. More and more advisors and different departments and different administrations, all under the executive branch, began really running policy, both domestic and foreign, and increasingly presidents were nothing more than a puppet. They didn't decide hardly anything, and it's only gotten worse. The whole larger continuity of government program and on has largely, mostly been done under the executive branch, with a little here and there from Congress. And you see that in one prominent example in the President's Council on Sustainable Development. That came in under Clinton in 1992. What is that? That's the United Nations Agenda 21 program, implemented and signed under the elder George H.W. Bush, then transferred into executive action under President Clinton, and it's still being pursued today. We've discussed very recently all the Agenda 21 things being pursued under President Obama's branch. So it's executive orders, it's executive fiat, it's agencies, it's all of it. It's all been misused. And you know what's in the President's Council on Sustainable Development?